and years and years, but I've always been on the river. And I'm sort of easing into retirement as a commercial guide now, and it's like Roger said, come on, why don't you give a talk? I said, all right, here we go. And my talk, it plays into this same theme of spawning grounds. Not only did the McKenzie spawn the McKenzie River Drift Boat, but it spawned something that went at this point throughout the entire West and starting to creep over and inspect the East Coast, taking this tiny little shallow draft light load boat into a mammoth whitewater big water boat. And so my talk is how the McKenzie spawned this incredible boat that I've spent most of my life rowing and building. So it's three integrated, why did you do that? Three integrated stories. I'm going to tell you about how boats evolved on the Colorado River, and briefly how they evolved up here, because we've got the displays of all these boats, and then how they crossed over with a guy named Martin Litton. So this is the Colorado River right here, and it's the green there is the Green River, and what used to be called the Grand River later became the Upper Colorado. There's the Colorado going down through Grand Canyon down to the Gulf of California, and on the West Coast, not one. We didn't do that well with evolution on the Colorado. We're going to talk about that. But that's Green River, Wyoming, where Major Powell started his exploration in 1879. And this is where Grand Canyon is, kind of the crux of the whole Colorado River drainage, and that's where it hits the sea. This is John Wesley Powell in 1869 decided to explore this uncharted river, and he used a boat called a Whitehall. And this was a boat designed for chop in harbors in the East and the Great Lakes. And this would be the boat that was the fastest boat and would get out to the ships coming in and do all the deals with the captain and the man and sell them supplies. So you had to have a really fast boat that was pretty good in chop. And Powell thought, well, that might just do it. And so he launched an expedition in 1869, had a hell of a rough run, and then came back in 1871, did it again, and this is a shot from 1871, and you can see the Whitehalls there with their beautiful curved bellies and that long keel on bottom. They're really fast. They don't turn worth a poop. So probably not the best choice. So they had disaster, they busted a couple up. There were some nice calm stretches. That's down in Grand Canyon there. And but some of the rapids they ran might not have worked out too well, and they portaged a lot. And I had the good luck to be a prop in a movie where we replicated the boats, or actually they were built by the Northwest School of Boat Building, and we got to run them. And this horrifies people back east because Whitehalls are dainty and you don't take them out in more than 6 inches of chop, and we're running them through 20-some foot waves here. But that's, as you can see, I just fell out of the boat. I'm getting back in here. That's Crystal Rapid. This is coming into Lava Falls with a head of steam. This is not an authentic recreation of Powell's trips. He wasn't that stupid. They portaged these things. But I'll tell you, you want to have some fun with your clothes on, try taking a Powell boat down Grand Canyon. This is a blast. This is my favorite clip from this movie. But as it turns out, they don't turn well. They don't hold much. They hold a lot of water. The second expedition, they put in a whole new center hatch. But, oh God, I just love this. I don't think I want to do this again, but this was really fun. That's me steering in the back. But that thing is just porpoising. And the two guys rowing it, they've got their backs downriver, and their only clue as to what's about to happen is the look of horror on my face. They can't take this away from me. That was so fun. So 20 years later, this fella here with the lamb chops decided to run a railroad through Grand Canyon. If some one-armed guy can go down in a boat, it must not be too steep a gradient. And he hired this other fellow, Robert Brewster Stanton, who was a well-known railroad engineer of the day, to go survey a trip. And they took basically the same kind of boat, maybe a little worse. They were smaller, skinnier, and sometimes that happened. An enormous upshooting wave struck the boat in the middle, and they drowned President Brown and two other men. Stanton went back and regrouped, improved the boats, and the way he improved them was building into them barrels that had a representative collection of all the things you might want if your boat busts up. And it worked. They busted up the Sweet Marie and found all the parts and still had food. But that's not really how you want to improve a boat, I don't think. But some great etchings from that trip. I mean, these are almost a canoe, but still, two people pulling downstream backwards, one person in the back rowing. They lined around a lot of rapids. I love this one, rescue work. Take your clothes off and head out into rapid, turbid water to help your friends. We don't do that anymore, but maybe we should get back into it. A hitch in the proceedings and a bad place serving out the life belts. And there's a good indication what that hull looked like. And again, this is not going to work in shallow water. It's not going to work in rocky water, and it really didn't work that well in big, deep water. So the first real change came when this guy shows up, named Nathaniel Galloway, up in northern Utah on the Green River. And in the 1890s, he started building his own boats. And that looks a little like an old McKenzie boat, too. Form follows function. And so they built a flat bottom boat, so that it didn't have that keel to hit the rocks. Upturned at both ends a little bit, and he turned around and rode upstream in the rapids to move back and forth. So this is the same kind of evolution that went on up here. And in 1896, he and that other fella took off and went through Grand Canyon with these. They didn't have a camera, but this is the boat, and it's the only shot we have of it. But again, it's this. It's got upturned on either end, flat transom downstream, and flat side to side. And no decking on this thing. They used kind of canvas decking. And they made it through. This is Galloway again with the cutest little thing. And this guy is Julius Stone, at 54 years old, hired Galloway to lead an expedition through and teach him to row. And they brought 4 boats along. One guy had to quit partway through, and 3 of them finished. And 1909, kind of looks like Dickie Smothers, doesn't it? That's Seymour Sylvester Dubendorf. And this is their photographer, Raymond Cogswell. And off they went. This is up in Wyoming, so there are 4 of them. And it's the Galloway design. You can see the bottom, the curve in the bottom, the rocker in the bottom, that one's upside down, getting a little repair work. And again, this to me looks like it could have evolved up here. And on they went. There's Leeds Ferry on a busy day at Grand Canyon. And this is cool. They in the big water, they put posts in the 4 corners of the cockpit and little curtains around there. A little hole for the oar to go through. And I guess it helped. Not like a spray deck. Portaging around Horn Creek Rapid in low water. And on down into bowels of Grand Canyon and out the Grand Wash Cliffs. So that was very successful. Stone went on to write about it, and Galloway and Dubendorf both died shortly thereafter. But the Cole brothers, who were photographers at South Rim of Grand Canyon, conversed and wrote letters back and forth with Julius Stone and got plans. They wanted to do it. They didn't want a guide. They wanted to do it their own way. And so they had 2 more of these boats built, and these are lap strake, where the individual planks are riveted together, much stronger than the old Galloway boats and a bit heavier. And off they went. And neither one of them knew how to row. So they learned in the fiery furnace of Colorado. This is up in the Canyon of Lador, working around Disaster Falls. This is a disaster. You can see that boat is kind of sinking. There's all their wet gear. But they just carried on. This is Christmas Day in Grand Canyon, and there's Emery sticking his head out a hole that he just punched in the side of his boat. But that's a good view of this boat, and again, it's a Galloway style. You can't really see the rocker, but you can see it's flat side to side, and transom, a pointy end. And here they are portaging. There's a lot of ice on the rocks at this point. And here's some footage that they took. They had the first movie cameras in Grand Canyon, and that's Cataract Canyon up in Utah. This is Mile Long Rapid, the entry to Mile Long Rapid. This is one of their first rapids. Bang! You don't want to really favor one end of the boat, so lowering down through rapids, rocking them across the rocks. Emery was a very diminutive fellow. Ellsworth, his older brother, was a good deal bigger. Okay, we got this. Oh, geez. Yeah, we're fine. That movie's played for 60 years at South Rim. And the longest running movie in the history of the world, 25 cents a shot, 4 times a day. So we decided to replicate that. This is Ellsworth back in Wisconsin as the original was being built, and this is outside of my shop. And I think we got it pretty good. We do have the original, so we were able to get exact measurements and build it in the same really strange way that one was built. And so this is a replica of Emery's Edith. And that's a crazy boat to row. Don't read my lips here, but we're about to go into Granite Falls. There's only a few rapids in Grand Canyon that end with the word falls. And they're pretty chaotic. And my little expletive there is I realize I've gotten myself into a stupid situation of my own doing again. But here we go. The whole river just crashes up against the cliff and just blowing water out my mouth there. And, it was way more violent than it looks like, too. But seemed to have made it. Now the problem with this boat is it's still too long and narrow. I'm trying to pull out here, it's just going to spin me. And so I'm cursing under my breath there. Put me out of the shade. But that's a Galloway boat. The U.S. Geological Survey, 1923, used the same style boats. Essentially, the Galloway style wiped out the evolutionary line of the Powell Whitehall keeled boats. You notice the passenger seating leaves a little to be desired. And again, they're a tough boat to row. They don't pivot that well, except when you don't want them to. Look at these guys clinging to it like a bunch of rats. Here's Frank Dodge. Boom. Oh, geez, he's gone. He claimed he dove off the boat. He didn't want to go where that boat was going. And then Buzz Holmstrom, who Roger talked about. And he built the final chapter in the Galloway lineage of boats. He was an Oregon boy from down in Coquille, came from a very poor logging family, and he's a very, very bright guy, kind of an autodidact. And he'd look at something and then he'd learn, and then he'd go do it his own way. And he started running rivers on the Rogue in 1934. His first night out on the river would have convinced me I'm not a boatman. As twilight set, he's standing on a rock because he crashed into it, jumped onto the rock, the boat flipped, swept away. He said, I wasn't a good swimmer, so I took my clothes off, wrapped them on a rock, threw them ashore and missed. I quit. And he swims ashore, wanders around in the woods, sees a light bulb, and it was Black Bar Lodge was just being built. And hollers, and they say, come in. He said, I can't, I've got no clothes. And they set him up. And they found the boat, righted the boat, gave him s'mores. And he ran the Rogue again, and he ran the Salmon alone, and then he built this final boat. And it was a 1920 Dodge Brothers touring car, and he paid $10 for it, and off he went to Wyoming. He's only got a couple shots from that trip, but this is portaging solo, a 500-pound boat around Big Drop 3 in Cataract Canyon. Just incredible feat alone. He caught up to Frank Dodge, who we saw coming out of his boat in the previous film there, most of the way through Grand Canyon. It's the first time two trips ever encountered each other on the Colorado, and they loved him. He's an amazing character. And rode out all the way across Lake Mead, banged into the dam, boom, and sent a telegram home to his mom that said, okay, at Boulder Dam. And he did it again the next year with another Oregonian, Amos Berg, out of Portland, who wanted to make a movie. And so this is really good boating here. That is the entrance to Hell's Half Mile, which is the steepest drop on the whole Colorado River system. And he's rowing upstream like a madman in a light rocker boat. Again, wow, watch him miss this hole. This is actually a shot from his first trip and meeting the geologists on that other trip. But an incredibly forward-looking boat. He made it much shorter, he made it wider, he added rocker, he even added crossways rocker. The thing pivots like a dream. And unfortunately, it's the end of the line for that kind of boat. But we did build a replica, Roger mentioned, and eternal gratitude for Roger for creating the lines of all these movies and still images that we had, and then bringing in people like Jerry Briggs and Willard Lucas and all these iconic Oregonians, and we recreated that boat, and it was really, really a treat. And here's just a little footage of it in action. And we took this footage with us in 2002 with Jerry Briggs and Roger and some of the other people that helped. And halfway through the trip at Mariel Lodge, we put on the footage of Buzz, the original footage, and it was just amazing. It's like, that's it. That is the boat. That boat has about 4,000 miles on it. Last week it had its first flip in a 25-foot exploding wake in Hermit Rapid. It's a justifiable flip. But really, really neat boat. But like I say, it's the last of the Galloways ever built until Roger and I built the replica. Because of this guy. I don't know what he's smoking, but it looks like he's having a good time. This guy's name is Norm Nevels, and he was in southern Utah at a place called Mexican Hat, and he came up with this boat. And this is the 1930s when he did, and that's when waterproof marine plywood was first invented. And so he made a boat that's much wider. It's like 5 feet wide and heavy as can be. He put a 1-inch floor on it and 7/8 inch sides, And it's pointy behind him, big flat transom up front, with a giant cockpit, much like the Galloways, and then two hatches that are really hard to pack through these tiny holes. But he did it to do commercial trips in, so it's hard to rationalize how he designed it. I mean, these two women wanted to go through Grand Canyon, and he took them and built 3 of these boats at once. He somehow knew how to create a boat. We don't know how he knew this, but this is him and his buddy Don Harris building them out in the desert. So much wider than the Galloways, shorter, very exaggerated rocker, and no place really for passengers or gear. There's Don Harris, his buddy. And there's one of them in action. They call him a sad iron. They look like kind of a big old flat iron that's a little bent in the middle. And here he is, Neville's meeting up with Henry Kolb and Buzz Holmstrom, 3 of the early boatmen. But a little bit of that boat in action. He's got a great smile. This is his first boat, by the way. This is and that's his bride, Doris Drown. What a name for a boat. But this is actual footage of Neville's, and they did line him around some rapids. But look at that huge cockpit, and that would fill with water when you hit a big wave. No upturn at the ends on the decking, so he's got the arms of a much larger man, they said. But that's how they ran them, facing downstream, that low, blunt transom, taking waves over the top. Crazy boat. But it dominates Colorado River boating for 30 years. So it's quite a feat to knock out the Galloway. And this is the replica we built of it. And that's Neville's 2 daughters, and Cameron in here went to high school with Joni. And that's pretty cool. But Joan Neville's and Sandy Neville's 2 daughters. And we named the replica Mo, which was their nickname for their mom. And that boat's got a couple Grand Canyon trips on it. And it runs, but you know, in rapids, that's not a great place to sit.
No.
And I've got a little footage of my friend Andy Hutchinson. This isn't our replica. This is a restored original. But it's a very flat boat, boosh, boosh, and fills up your cockpit. And yeah. So this is how evolution is going down in Grand Canyon. We've gotten to a very wet boat, but fairly stable. So there's a couple of characters that worked with Neville's. Multi-Fulmer was one of them, and a quick flashback on the San Juan. These are the boats they had at the turn of the last century. Long, flat, upturned at the ends, just a little kind of a punt. And Neville's invented a boat for the San Juan called the San Juan punt, and looks very much like the 1890s boats. A lot of rocker and completely open, so not a good big water boat, but that was his bread and butter on the San Juan. And one of his passengers was a guy named Multi-Fulmer, who invented this boat, the Gem. And there is a book out saying it's a McKenzie. Roger and I don't agree on that. We believe it's more of a San Juan punt, slightly exaggerated. He's still got that pointy end behind him and the blunt end downstream, giant cockpit. But probably the best boat of its day. Another guy that went down with Neville's is pointing at us here. That's P.T. Riley. And he did a few trips with Neville's. That's Neville's in the red hat. And decided he didn't want to be a commercial boatman, and the Neville's boat was stupid. And so he made an improvement. There he is rowing a Neville's boat. And here's his boats. And they're much like a Neville's boat, except they're pointy on both ends. So you don't have that low, blunt transom hitting the waves. And he did deck in that whole cockpit. So now he's got a boat that is much more waterworthy, but what he didn't think to do was raise the shear, raise the top of the boat. So one of these, a replica, one of these ended up in a commercial fleet later on, and it was called the Sub. because it does tend to go through the waves. Sometimes they flip over. He built them out of fiberglass, which was kind of a new technique at the time, and not a good technique at the time, and they spent almost every camp patching boats year after year. And one trip they got to Lava Falls, decided it was too high to run, kicked them off, hiked out, and hitchhiked 100 miles around, and went and found 2 out of 3 still floating in Lake Powell, or Lake Mead. And again, not the greatest advance in boating technique. And we are patching again. And in the end, they would no longer hold water, and halfway through a trip, he emptied them out, put rocks in them, punched holes in them, kicked them off, and hiked out. And that's the end of the Neville's line of boats, right there at Pike Creek. Always wanted to do that. So now, here's where things come to Oregon. This is a guy named Martin Litton, and he was born in Southern California and was just a natural-born proto-environmentalist. When he was 18 in the early 30s, he was writing to the LA Times about the desecration of Mono Lake, like 30 years before anybody else thought it was a bad thing. Martin was raising hell. And he went to work for the LA Times and would sneak these stories in, environmental stories. Reclamation Bureau plan, perilous scenic wonderland. And he's already seeing the dam people starting to think about the dams way before anybody else. He hiked in 1952 and joined a trip and met the Neville's crew. And that gave him some ideas about wanting to go boating. Another story, Colorado Perils Thrill Hitchhiker. And 1954, he became the editor of Sunset Magazine. And the travel editor had pretty much free range from the entire West Coast. He was also a World War II pilot, a glider pilot, and Sunset had an airplane, and so he'd fly all over the place all the time. And so he spent some time in Oregon. 1955, he did his first Grand Canyon trip with Riley before he sunk the boats. And he had dislocated his shoulder, so he didn't get to row on that first trip. But he had also spent the whole spring boating up in Dinosaur and working with the Sierra Club. This is one of the early Sierra Club protest books on the dams in Dinosaur. So he's using boats as an environmental vehicle to get these photos. 1956, he came back and rowed one of these boats for Riley. And earlier that year, in '56, the April issue, he introduces river running as an adventure vacation plan for people. Nobody had thought of that, of just going boating for fun. It was always for fishing or mining or something. Family adventure, the river run. And this is pretty cool. He lists a lot of the boats and boat people in 1956, and he's got a Rogue River style boat. He's got a McKenzie, in addition to the San Juan punt and the Neville's boat and the rafts that were coming in. And he had already found out who the big name people were up in Oregon. There's Bob Pruitt, Sid Pyle, Glenn Wooldridge, Elmer Briggs, that's Jerry Briggs' dad, Prince Helfrich. So in 1956, he already knew who these guys were. And he also started calling the drift boat a dory, much to the chagrin of many drift boaters. It's not a dory, damn it. So Martin's around doing